1975. Margaret Thatcher defeats Ted Heath to become the first female leader of the Conservative Party. ABBA reigns supreme. And Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody hits the airwaves. The 1970s was a decade of contrasts, bell-bottoms and disco mixed with great economic hardship and huge cultural change. Cambridge, a beautiful city and home to one of the world's best universities, was known for a much more sinister reason. Gripped by fear, a monster was stalking its streets, brutally attacking women with terrifying violence since the previous year, and the police had no idea where he would strike next. It would soon become what was at that time the biggest manhunt in British criminal history. Friday, October 18th, 1974. Springfield Road in Mitcham's Corner in the heart of Cambridge. A 20-year-old woman was at home getting ready for bed when the lights suddenly went out. She heard noises coming from downstairs. As the footsteps started to come up the stairs, she was faced with a terrifying realization. Someone had broken into her house. Before she knew it, there was a man in her room. He said to her, "I came to rob, but I'll stay to rape." He then subjected her to a horrifying sexual attack. Before leaving, he also stole a small amount of money from the house. She survived her ordeal and told the officers that the attacker was short and young. One of the detectives working on the case was Detective Superintendent Bernard Hodson. He was the deputy of Cambridge CID, and he would eventually lead the investigation. According to him, the description given made things incredibly difficult for the investigators, as it could have been most of the men in Cambridge. An attack like this was immediately picked up by the Cambridge Evening News. Reporter Eddie Duller said this kind of crime just didn't happen in the city, especially something so violent. However, due to the lack of details, it only got a small paragraph on the inside pages. Hodson was sure that this was an opportunistic attack, meaning it was impossible to know when or where the rapist would strike next. It wouldn't be long before he would commit his next attack. 2 weeks later, on Friday the 1st of November 1974, a woman was at home on Abbey Road. After getting out of the bath and leaving the bathroom, the lights in her house suddenly went out. As she called out into the darkness, a man in a long wig ran up the stairs at her. Like the woman 2 weeks earlier, she was raped before the attacker fled the house, leaving his victim terrified and traumatized. Another similarity was that he would talk to the victims for several minutes and describe exactly what he was going to do. She gave the police the same description as the first victim. The attacker was short and young. Police soon connected the two attacks, as it appeared there was a pattern emerging. He would strike at night after breaking in, where a young woman was home alone. Police began trying to find evidence that could forensically link the two attacks and confirm if they were carried out by the same person. The victims' clothes were sent for analysis. This was before the time of DNA profiling, so the scientific task before the team was enormous. Whilst the scientific analysis got underway, the police carried out searches and door-to-door inquiries to try and gain any information. Despite the best efforts of investigators, nobody came forward. As the two attacks had occurred on a Friday night, the following Friday police set up roadblocks throughout Cambridge and stopped and interviewed any man that fit the description. The weekend came and went and the attacker hadn't struck, so the roadblocks were taken away. But the Monday after, he struck again, this time on Huntingdon Road. A young woman was at home in her small flat opposite Fitzwilliam College in an all-female house. She was originally from Australia and was packing her things to make the trip home sometime between 7:30 and 8 p.m. After hearing a noise coming from the front door at 8:50, she went to investigate. She was confronted by a man in a long wig. He was wearing little other than a blanket. He attempted to attack her, but she fought back, kneeing him in his stomach and ripping the wig off his head. He quickly ran off into the night before she threw the wig after him and slammed the door shut. He returned not long after to retrieve the wig that she had thrown back at him, removing a vital piece of evidence from the scene. After being alerted, police quickly descended on Huntingdon Road, but the attacker was long gone. Investigators now knew that the perpetrator was disguising himself with wigs, but what they couldn't work out was how he was able to evade capture so quickly. Homerton is a woman-only college at Cambridge University, situated in a beautiful old Victorian house. Students would come and go to practice their music, and many of the rooms were soundproof. Although the third attack had been thwarted, he was not going to give up that easily. Just 2 days later, he struck again. Prior to this, the attacker had struck where people lived in bedsits, but this changed on the night of Wednesday, the 13th of November. On this occasion, he would take his crime spree into the colleges of the university. He broke into Homerton and abducted one of the women as she rehearsed in a music room. He used what investigators later believed to be some kind of chloroform or ether to subdue her. He then dragged her out of the house and took her across the grounds. He subjected her to a horrifying sexual assault, and just like all the women before her, she couldn't give an accurate description, nor could she identify him. Police were becoming increasingly worried as he had now used drugs to overpower his victims, meaning his confidence was growing. The women of Cambridge were terrified as he had now upped the ante by breaking into the campus, a place where students ought to have felt safe.
I mean, we all sort of work all the way around Cambridge, and we sort of collect each other as we come home. And so this is the main thing, we're never on our own, ever.
The police needed to make sure that the women in the city were able to protect themselves, so crime prevention officers were on hand to deliver talks to help women secure their homes and teach them self-defense strategies in case they were attacked. At the time, the supermarket chain Woolworths sold a multifunctional torch that doubled as an alarm. Within an hour of the crime prevention officers giving their talk, the Woolworths store in Cambridge had completely sold out. Within a month, 4 women had been attacked, and the police were no closer to catching the culprit. The police also knew that these were not separate attacks. These were committed by one incredibly violent and dangerous offender. Based on the descriptions of the survivors, the police were able to produce a photo fit of the man they were looking for. The incident room at the police station was being staffed 24/7 to take in any tips people had, and everything was noted down. The UK media descended on Cambridge, and the pressure was growing every day for the police. The picturesque city had now become the centre of a media firestorm. In a desperate bid to stop further attacks, checkpoints had increased throughout the city, and more police were drafted in to help with the investigation. Detectives couldn't go on leave, and many worked around the clock. A month would pass with no attacks, but on the night of Sunday the 8th of December, in a bedsit on Elstone Road, he struck again. A woman was asleep upstairs when she was awoken by a man in her room. After manhandling her down the stairs, they went past the room of a couple who also lived at the property. They heard the woman protesting and repeatedly saying no, but unfortunately, neither investigated what was going on. He took her out into the garden, where she was tied up and raped. This showed that he was growing in confidence as he had now changed his MO. He normally attacked women who lived on their own, but he had now attacked someone who lived with other people. However, this was also where he had made his first massive mistake. After he left, the victim heard her attacker cycling away. Police now knew that this was how he was evading them. He was using his bike to travel the back streets and alleyways of Cambridge to escape the roadblocks. This also meant he most likely was local to the area and knew it well. As the next week rolled around, there was another attack in Cambridge. He broke into a house located on Victoria Road. One of the residents who lived there said it was around 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and her boyfriend was staying with her. Another roommate who lived at the back of the house was woken up by a bright light being shone in her face. However, her boyfriend was also staying with her too, and when the attacker realised that she wasn't alone, he quickly turned and ran. She screamed and woke up the rest of the house, but he was long gone. They quickly called the police. Terrifyingly, just 15 minutes after the officers arrived on scene, they received another call of an attack. He had gone back to the same property where he had attacked the Australian girl. One of the girls who lived there had been at a party that evening and described having a dream where someone was talking and glasses were clinking. Horrifyingly, it wasn't a dream. She was actually hearing the Cambridge rapist smashing glass and attacking one of the residents. Before they knew it, the victim was running around the side of the house, pressing all the bells to the different rooms, trying to wake people up. She had serious cuts and was covered in blood. Bernard Hodson said this had been the most violent attack to date and showed just how depraved and dangerous this man was. Despite the horrific ordeal she had just been through, she was determined to provide the police with a description to try and bring this man to justice. She described him as having a beard, and while the police thought this was most likely a false beard, they created new e-fits showing what he looked like with it. They also produced a photo of what they believed he looked like without the beard. The police started to draw up a list of the known criminals in the area who had the ability to commit these awful crimes. And one name kept coming up: Peter Samuel Cook. He was an incredibly skilled burglar who had been on the police's radar for an awfully long time. Despite his long rap sheet, he had no history of committing sexual violence, leading the police to wonder whether or not they were questioning the right man at all. But what they kept coming back to was that he was one of only a few known criminals in Cambridge that could break in undetected and leave virtually no trace. He would frequently torment the police with unsolved burglaries that he had committed, and he was cold and arrogant when questioned. He argued that while he was the same height as the rapist, he didn't look anything like the photo fit that had been produced. He also said that he was happily married, and being 47 years old, he was at least 20 years older than the person they were probably looking for. They asked him if he would provide a routine saliva sample to compare with what was found at the crime scenes, but in 1974, it wasn't compulsory for suspects to do this. Peter Cook declined to provide one. The police had no choice but to let him go. Investigators continued to apply pressure to their suspects, and it appeared to work, as the attacks suddenly stopped. As the investigation continued, the attacker began playing a game of cat and mouse with the police, whilst also letting the women of Cambridge know he was still there. He would use lipstick to write on the window of the intended victim, saying, "Sleep tight, the rapist." 4 months would pass, and with no more attacks, the police thought that maybe he had gone elsewhere, and that the women of Cambridge could begin to relax. This hope, however, was soon shattered. On the evening of Sunday, April 13th, 1975, the unthinkable happened. A woman was at home on Marshall Road when the light in her bedroom suddenly went on. She then felt a knife being pressed against her throat by a man in a leather mask with the eyes cut out and a zip across the lips. As in previous attacks, he spent several minutes talking to the victim, describing what he was going to do to her. After brutally raping her, he left her tied up and gagged while he fled the property. She stayed there quietly for the next 4 hours before she was able to raise the alarm. The seventh attack, in the use of a horrifying leather mask, had left everyone in shock. The students of Cambridge took matters into their own hands, and a student protection group was formed. Female students could contact the group, and male students would be sent over to sleep at the property and protect the female residents. The response by female students was immediate, and many requested assistance from the student protection group. The following month, in early May 1975, the Detective Chief Superintendent Charles Narn revealed they had finally had a breakthrough.
We've been working for a considerable length of time on specimens taken from every one of the attack scenes. After the last attack, they were able to come up with information concerning a combination of factors which will lead us to a very small section of the community.
After examining the samples in the lab, they discovered that semen was present on some of them. Peter Lamb served as a forensic scientist as part of the investigation and found that the perpetrator was a Group O secretor. Secretors are those whose blood group substances are also found in their body fluids. They also found something even more interesting. After examining the sample microscopically, they found that the attacker was infertile, either due to a vasectomy or another medical reason. Following discussions with the pathology departments, they estimated that roughly 1 in 10,000 would be infertile in this way. Knowing that the blood type could be found in a saliva sample would lead the police to make an unprecedented decision. They agreed to test every single man in the area who fit the physical description of the Cambridge rapist. This mass screening was a groundbreaking method, and hundreds of men came forward to offer their samples and rule themselves out. Before long, more than 1,600 men had come forward and given samples. However, as forensic testing was still very much in its infancy, they would have to wait several weeks to get the results back. On May 4th, the Cambridge rapist struck again, and he had changed his methods once more. He attempted to attack a woman, but she was able to escape and alert the police. He wouldn't go quiet for very long, however, as the next day he attacked another woman on Pye Terrace, this time in broad daylight. She had been away for the weekend and her flatmates were away too. After going into her flat, she was confronted by the elusive attacker. Keen to add to his notoriety, he had written "rapist" on the forehead of his leather mask. While he was committing this crime, his victim from the attempted attack the night before had gone to the police station. While his confidence was growing, little did he know that the net was closing in around him, and he couldn't run forever. They brought their strongest suspect back in for questioning, Peter Samuel Cook. He was his usual arrogant self and provided police with an alibi. He was in the boatyard talking to the managing director shortly before the attack took place, and was then believed to be in the boatyard as the ambulance went by, taking the victim to hospital from her home. In June 1975, the police were still going out each night for surveillance. The team were briefed by Charles Narn on Saturday the 7th of June, and 90 officers were deployed across the city. One of these officers was stationed with another constable on Selwyn Road, behind one of the hedges. They had to stay there and stop anyone who was walking down the street. A short walk away on Alstone Croft, the rapist was breaking into the nurse's residence in the early morning hours of Sunday the 8th. One of the occupiers was in her bedroom when she heard knocking at her door and someone jiggling the door handle. She opened the door but left it on the chain. The rapist tried to force his way through, and armed with a knife, he cut her arm all the way from the wrist to the elbow. She screamed so loudly that it was heard by the fishermen on the bank, who alerted the police, who were told that one of the residents had been attacked and stabbed. All observation teams were put on standby and were ordered to stop everyone they came across. Little did the constables on Selwyn Road know, the Cambridge rapist was heading straight for them. What appeared to be a woman in a blonde wig quickly cycled past them, and further up the road, an undercover officer saw the woman coming towards him. He called out for her to stop, but she didn't. The detective put his foot out, and as the rider came off the bike, so too did the long blonde wig. The officer shouted up to one of the residents who had come to the window after hearing the commotion, telling her he was with the police and she needed to call the station immediately, saying, "I think I've got him. I know I've got him. It's him." The arresting officer was Detective Constable Terry Edwards, who told a reporter exactly what happened.
I made a dive, stopped him, pulled the wig off, saw that it was a person that I knew. I didn't know his name at the time, but I knew his face. He then pulled away from me and quite a fight took place. We were rolling down in the road, bouncing off cars. It was like trying to grab hold of a bar of wet soap.
The man was the one they had long suspected, Peter Samuel Cook. Cementing the case against him, a bag he was carrying contained even more damning evidence. The leather mask he had used during his latest attacks, a knife and the instrument he had used to fuse the lights and plunge the houses he broke into darkness. Cook knew that the game was up, and he eventually confessed. In an outhouse near his caravan, the police found the life that this supposedly happily married man had been so desperate to keep hidden. They found numerous disguises, items he had stolen from different properties, wigs, clothing, and underwear that he had stolen from clotheslines. They also found ether, which he had used to overpower some of his victims. But who exactly was Peter Samuel Cook? He was born on the 17th of August 1928 in Cambridge to respectable parents. However, his run-ins with the law started from a very young age. In his youth, he soon found himself being sent to approved schools. Approved schools were residential schools for young offenders. They were usually sent to a residential school for breaking the law, and could also be sent if their parents were unable to control them. In spite of the school's supposed security, Cook would often find a way to escape and run away. In 1952, whilst on his way to Dartmoor prison to begin a 5-year sentence for store breaking, he found a way out of his holding cell and went on the run. He had been arrested numerous times for committing burglaries and was frequently in and out of prison and mental health hospitals, including Broadmoor, one of the most notorious high-security psychiatric hospitals in the UK. His continued criminality and ability to evade capture carried on as he moved into adulthood. He was often being sent to prison, but would routinely abscond, subsequently becoming one of the most wanted escapees in the country. He lived in a small village called Hardwick, around 5 miles outside of Cambridge, and worked as a delivery driver for Dollarmore's Wine Company. His pride and joy was a seafaring boat named after his wife Margaret. Although having no history of sex offences, it soon became apparent that he had been stealing women's clothing for a long time. There were rumours that he had been thrown out of the army for dressing as a woman, and his 5-year stretch in Dartmoor was for robbing a woman's clothing store. It was also discovered that Cook had a rare condition leading to an extra female chromosome, and subsequently became addicted to violent pornography. It is believed that his time in Broadmoor had been the catalyst that had changed him from a serial burglar to a dangerous sex offender. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The following day, he was taken to appear before the magistrates' court, and screaming crowds waited for a glimpse of the man who had terrorised them for so long. He stood silently in the dock with his head down, and showed no remorse for any of his actions. One of the magistrates later said he felt he was looking into the eyes of evil, and had he not been stopped, he may well have gone on to kill somebody. At the Crown Court, the horrifying scale of his crimes came to light. He had a collection of keys that could open most of the front doors in Cambridge, allowing him to quietly enter the properties. He had managed to evade the police for so long by planning his next move meticulously. His work as a delivery driver gave him the time to watch the bedsits and know when potential victims would be most vulnerable, at home alone. On October 3rd, 1975, Peter Samuel Cook pleaded guilty to 6 counts of rape. He was handed 2 life sentences for his appalling crimes. The hard work and dedication of the Cambridge police over the 8-month-long campaign of terror had finally paid off. The case captured the public's attention like few others had, and soon became a part of pop culture. Malcolm McLaren was a provocative designer and visual artist, and also known as the manager of the Sex Pistols and the Goo Goo Dolls. He designed a t-shirt featuring the leather mask that Cook had used during his attacks. He and punk fashion designer Vivienne Westwood sold the shirts in the sex boutique shop on the King's Road in Chelsea. Cook spent the first 20 years of his sentence at Leicester High Security Prison. In 1995, he made an application for parole, and there were talks of plans to move him to an open prison. The Member of Parliament for Cambridge, Anne Campbell, opposed the moves, arguing he shouldn't be released or have the security surrounding him lowered. Following this, the Home Office Minister Michael Forsyth said that Cook would never be released unless experts could be satisfied that he no longer posed a threat to the public. A year later, he was moved to a low-security prison in Doncaster. On Saturday, the 10th of January 2004, Peter Samuel Cook died in his prison cell of natural causes. He was 75 years old. The horrifying crimes he committed had left a whole community in fear and a trail of destruction and devastation. He never revealed what caused him to commit his dreadful offences, and those awful secrets died with him.